Hello and welcome to season 6, episode 38 of Dualistic Unity. I am looking forward to seeing what happens on this episode because it's just been hitting me more and more how much of a story you can tell yourself about what you think you are, who you think you are, that you're some sort of character, some sort of thing that lives in your head, some sort of idea that you can look to when you want to feel sure about something. I'm going to deal with that live thing later. When you want to be sure of something, like how you're doing. And when you don't look to that so much anymore, you realize how many walls were in place because you were looking for that or looking to that, trying to maintain certain walls and perspectives of yourself when they weren't actually ever the case. And that's how I'm starting this episode.
One moment for the people not watching. I am just moving my seat just a little bit closer to this brand new mic. And we are starting episode 38 with all 3 brand new mics, upgraded, working, and sounding extra crispy. And outside of that, it feels like I am experiencing more and more being the space for the excitement, for the episode, for the conversation, for the room, for myself in it and everyone else. It feels more and more like I am experiencing being the space for everything, for every experience to happen within without being necessarily tied to one experience over the others. And if it does feel that way, which it can and it will again, it's when I am so certain about a certain portion or a certain experience that it feels like I am in the middle of instead of the space for.
This is going to be a fun episode. I've been thinking about this one a lot because, and again, cheers to the new microphones because these sound great, or at least we've been told that they sound great, and I'm sure I'll find out later on when I'm editing this thing. So we've been on this discussion for a long time. We're like 6 seasons in, and 550 plus episodes have been recorded. Woo, that's a lot. But we've been talking about the recognition that the idea of you isn't you, and that the result or what remains is that you are everything. And that can be incredibly freeing when you understand what it means, but then it can be in another prison when you decide to think about that. And what I mean, and you'll notice this, I've focused on this a lot over the last 6 seasons: selflessness, uncertainty. Selflessness, especially. Not the kind of selflessness where you are trying to be selfless, but rather the kind of selflessness that results from you just not being so goddamn needy. Just from you coming to terms with your need to feel in control, your need to feel valuable, your need to feel like you're more, your need to feel accepted, just to come to terms with that. And if you can come to terms with that and just not act on any of those needs, that doesn't mean to eradicate those needs. It means to be aware of them, to accept them, to see where they come from with acceptance and love, if you'd like to put it that way. All right. But it's to just deal with them as they arise rather than immediately rising to them, trying to act them out. And what results is that you are just living your life. You're playing your role. You interact with people, you say what you're going to say, you interact with them according to, again, the needs that you are addressing in yourself, which means where once you might have needed to put on a show and try and impress this person, now that you're addressing that, you don't. And so you're a little bit more authentic, and thus you have a different ripple in their life. That ripple being one of authenticity, one where you're not asking anything of them, where you're not trying to get something from them, you're not pushing and you're not pulling. So that is the kind of selflessness that results from dealing with your shit. Then there's the other kind of selflessness, which is really just another form of selfishness. And that's to try to be selfless in order to be unifying, to be selfless in order to have an impact, to be selfless in order to manipulate the world. And immediately you start to go through all these scenarios of things that you have to do in order to be selfless, all these things that you have to do in order to be unifying or to be present. You come up with this concept of letting go instead of the actual application of letting go, which is always with your needs moment to moment to moment. Letting go of your need to rise to them, letting go of their importance. But instead, recognizing that your everything can easily become self-importance rather than freedom. It can easily become a sense of responsibility for everything rather than responsibility as everything for right now. And that's where you start getting like your Messiah complex. That's where you start to hear why these people on Instagram and otherwise will say it is dangerous to think that you're a God. And they're right, because the thought of God is not the reality. The reality is the result of getting out of the way.
Very much so. And on Instagram and TikTok, I was certainly one of those people, for a while, up until right now. I mean, when is that not really the case, the opportunity, to let go? And so to do it right now is just relaxing and recognizing, the selfishness that has been played out in different ways, like the reality of feeling, very self important because of the thought of being God, like it can really do a number on your perspective of yourself because it becomes a new idea of yourself. And it's like, oh, it got traded for the old idea, the old one that you didn't like. Then it's built on top of that as one that, you do, makes you feel good. And without that idea, you're just being everything. But it's not about the thought of being everything. It's about just being everything and relaxing and showing up and not thinking about some sort of character in your interactions, like not superimposing your interactions with this idea of a person, because like that person isn't you. That person, that idea that you're thinking about, like it's not really you. It's just this sort of thing that you can put in place that can allow you to think that you're in control as long as you're able to maintain it within yourself. But then your world gets very small and very separate, and you start to just be by yourself. A lot of the videos I would make were just by myself. I had an aversion even to interacting with people, on a live stream or something, or in person, collaborating even. And so I've been very insecure in a lot of ways, but then was able to kind of curate a character in my head in a lot of ways.
For yourself, yeah.
For myself, to feel better about things. But it was very much a blinder, I think, to a lot of my actions.
See, I want to get into this because somebody said here, I felt it brought me back to my ego side. And I can only assume that they're talking about the idea of being God, which is, again, the idea of being God. But there's always this sense, and I know I went through it too, that the ego is a bad thing. Oh my God, I'm thinking about myself.
Gotta kill it.
I got to get rid of that. Got to get rid of that. But it's that moment-to-moment interaction with the idea of yourself that teaches you empathy. It's the moment-to-moment interaction with those needs that teaches you how needy we all feel, how scared we all are, the common denominator of uncertainty. Because you'll notice that all of your needs are trying to answer the problem of uncertainty. all of the thoughts in your head, all of those needs that beg to be itched, are all trying to solve your fear and your insecurity. And in seeing them moment to moment, in dealing with them, and again, accepting them, understanding them, not vilifying them, not looking at the actions or thoughts of the ego or that are the ego as a bad thing, but to recognize it for what it is, which is a perspective that is valid. It's a valid perspective. To vilify the perspective of our quote unquote ego is to vilify everyone, right? Including ourselves. There is nothing wrong with your ego. If it wasn't for the ego, you would not love other people, right? Because you wouldn't have the perspective of other people. If it wasn't for the ego, you wouldn't have, family, friends. If it wasn't for the ego, you wouldn't have any of these things, because these are all parts of your identity that you've built over a lifetime. But that said, it's the commitment to that identity that is changing. See, that's the point. Fighting the ego is really just another egotistical response. Trying to eradicate the ego is another way of reinforcing the ego. Who's killing the ego? I am. Well, why? Because I don't think it's necessary. Wow, are you sure? Because you seem really fucking sure about that. It's just another egotistical response. Well, then what is the alternative to that? To accept the ego, to accept it in the same way that you would accept somebody in your life that wasn't necessarily always honest with you. They may not always be honest with you, but there's a reason for that. And it has nothing to do with you, right? So you can respect that about the ego. You can respect that it has certain perspectives that are valid from the perspective of that perceiver. That's all it is. When you're thinking about yourself, there are certain perspectives that are valid. But as you start to let go of that, you realize, oh yeah, those perspectives are valid, but only if I'm super sure, only if I'm making assumptions, only if I'm absolutely certain of my own limitations. That's what makes those perspectives valid. And so as you get older and you grow, you start to realize, like, yeah, okay, my ego can be there, but it doesn't call the shots. My ego can be there, and it's going to inform my art. It's going to inform my music. It's going to inform how I talk to people, how I empathize with people. My ego can be there informing me every step of the way. And I can equally be God. Because duality is unity. It's the perspective of it all that just changes over time. There's nothing to eradicate. Relax. Just relax. Let time do its thing. Go through the moments. And try not to make it about you. The idea. Because as soon as it's about you, the idea, that's when you get all twisted up in knots. And you'll know it's about you, the idea, if you're thinking about it.
Man, you want to go?
Yeah. There is no enemy. It's very easy to say that the ego is the enemy, because then it makes sense to be in a state of war, to live like each day is a battlefield. But if there is no enemy, then there is nothing to fight for. There is no war to win. There is nothing to lose. And so, as we're talking about the ego, the movie If comes to mind, Imaginary Friend. And this is the one that's starring Ryan Reynolds and, damn, I forget his name. He was in Jack Reacher in The Office. John Krasinski.
John Krasinski.
Yes.
Yeah. I forget that we can just talk into these kind of at the same time, too.
We can all get in here and talk to one another, and it sounds like we're just super close, like we're all in a closet.
Oh my goodness, that's awesome. This gives me like fort vibes. Like we're in a blanket fort right now. But in that movie, the main character is a young girl, and she is growing up, and she's not a kid, and she doesn't need imaginary friends in the same way that we say we don't need the ego. And then certain considerations are brought up, and it's reconsidered in the movie whether or not imaginary friends are something that are just for kids, that are for adults, are something that we need, are a problem, or something to avoid, or something to go after. And I like being able to pair that with the discussion that we're having about the ego, because it's very much something that we think that we have to outgrow, that we need to let go of at some point. And it's like, no, the imaginary friend and the ego, are providing that same benefit. They're providing you an outlet. They're providing you with a base, they're providing you with a soundboard to explore ideas and perspectives and to play and to be creative and to express curiosity and life and excitement. And so I think it makes more sense to not think I need to get rid of anything, and just see where that conflict is coming from, which is usually that I think that there's a problem. And there's only a problem if I decide that there is, because up until the point that I think that there's something wrong, nothing felt like it was wrong.
No, it's got to be your own assumption, like your own response in the moment, and like how much is that perspective of you, in the way of what's going on, like your perspective of yourself, and like the ways that you think about yourself, or the thoughts about the right ways to act or be, or the correct ways to live. Like, it was hitting me more and more this morning how much like all of this, like all of society, everything is like made up. Like, the number of things that we just focus on in our head to try and curate and then be sure of, and then oh, this is right, this is wrong, just do these things, follow these rules, and then you'll get this thing, pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, that whole thing. And there are no guarantees. Like, the thought of heaven and hell, like, that as long as you do those things, you'll get to heaven after you die. It's like, that is such a big, massive bank.
It's equally false if you think you can do a number of things to get to heaven while you're here.
Yeah.
See, either way, if you're trying to get to heaven, here or otherwise, you're missing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just right here, because it's that perspective of yourself. It's that, the devil is yourself. It's that idea that you have that cuts you off from everyone else, that causes you to feel like there's something to be, something you should do or shouldn't do. And like, yeah, how much is that your focus? Like, how much of your day-to-day choices and decisions are focused on yourself?
And why?
And
because
why?
if they're not, you're left with just here.
Mm-hmm.
Just here. And again, it's really unsatisfying when you really just get out of your own way and you're left in the room that you've been filling with thought up until that moment. And then you just look around at your rather empty, quiet ass room. It's just you. It's just you now, and you've got all this space to just live, but there's no sense of what you should do and what you shouldn't do. There's no sense of, what's going to make you better or what's going to make you worse. Now you're just left with life. You're just left with it here, now. And that's why we run, is because there's so much space there. And there is no one to tell you the right answer. But isn't it funny? Because that's what we want, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Isn't that what we want? Freedom? The freedom to actually make our own decisions, the freedom to look at things for ourselves, the freedom to actually determine what our life is about. Mm-hmm. But how can we do that if we're never actually sitting in life long enough to figure out what the fuck it is? And I mean this sincerely, like just being unsatisfied for a while. And I mean that. If you're listening to this, make that a practice. If you get up in the day, don't try to paint a rosy picture like today's going to be awesome and I'm going to make the most of it. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be present. Don't do that. I mean, just don't. Just wake up, roll out of bed, kind of yawn, stretch, do that thing. Maybe don't be all smiley. Maybe just think to yourself, shower would be good. Just go to the shower and take a shower. And what you'll find is that as you sit there in that place where you're not trying to be satisfied, where you're not trying to be anything, where you're not filling it with thought, is that you start to pay more and more attention to the experience that you are actually having. Because there's nothing satisfying about life, but it is completely fulfilling. not in a way that makes you more or a way that satisfies some lack, but in a way that you are completely involved with it moment to moment. There is no lack to feel because all of you is involved with the experience that you are and that you're having. It helps to keep that in mind, that this urge to chase satisfaction, to chase heaven, to chase being an enlightened person, a unifying person, a good person, any of these things, really just tears you away from the reality where you are already connected to everything. And the greatest change that you can have is just in being yourself.
Yeah. Just being yourself, just being honest with yourself, and just looking at, the tendencies that you have had to think about yourself, be honest with those, and just not keep doing it. Just dropping it in the moment that you're in.
As it pops up.
Yeah.
Rather than trying to preemptively drop things. That's the danger of the mind. Oh, there's going to be things down the road I'm going to have to let go of. I should make a list. Now let go of them now. It's like, nope, you're just putting them on a list now.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, because the alternative is just relaxing, and just being where you're at, and like just paying attention to the experience that you're having, and realizing, where you've put yourself first. And because even like apologizing for things, that's not really doing that's not change.
Well,
it's like,
who are you
change.
trying to tell that you were putting yourself first at that point? Like, who are you really just avoiding taking it in yourself by making somebody else accept it? Like, that's the big thing about that. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't very present with you. Well, you're still not. Now you're thinking about the past, and now you're making me think about the past. You're going to apologize for that now?
Right.
And the loop continues.
Right. And then you just focus on that and assume that, there's something to be based on that. Assume there's some character, some story that you got to live up to because you feel like you have so far. It's like, really, you've just blinded yourself from your experience.
No, you haven't done shit. You've done the best you could. See, that's the problem with looking back like that, is that you're looking back at a fiction. You're looking back at your judgments. You're looking back at your perceptions. You're looking back at, again, your insecurities now. You're not looking back at the past. You're not in any way looking back at what you've done. What you're doing is you're looking back at how you still judge yourself. Now you're projecting it into the past, though.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's just the focus right now. That's all, because then it's like there can be things that expand from there. Stories, other characters, because even the characters of other people too, they're just characters as well. Like the way that you see someone isn't actually them. It's like a character in your story, your focus, like, it's so personal in that way too, in a sense. It's like recognizing one way or the other that it's, or trying to make it about you versus not. It's like that element of control. It's like, no, you're happening out here. You're happening like in front of your eyes, not behind your eyes, not in your head, but out in reality, in life.
Yeah. And you can't be categorized. Like, that's the whole point. Like, you can't, like, even the idea that, you could know somebody. What does that mean? What does it mean to know somebody, to have an idea of them? Oh, Jill would never do this because Jill does this and this and this. And I've always known Jill to do this. And Jill is exactly the same thing you are. And that's really ultimately the reason you don't want to look at that, is because you don't want to realize that you are not what you want to think you are, right? That you will never be what you want to think that you are. And so that's what all of this comes down to. When I look at people, I see a giant question mark, in the same way when I look at myself. Anything's possible. Anything's possible. Just because that they're acting a certain way up until a certain point doesn't mean that they can't suddenly switch. Right? But you can certainly convince yourself, nope, that's a certain type of person. If you're trying to convince yourself that you can do the same, that you can be a certain kind of person.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And that one, like those things, just the walls, the lines we put up in the sand, about what we think we are and what we should or shouldn't do or be, how we should or shouldn't act, like all of these made up ideas based on our own fears, just based on our own sort of perspectives of trying to, subdue certain things or have certain judgments about certain ways of acting or ways of living. It's like then we create rules around them, and then it's not really about being relaxed at all. It's just about following the rules in the best way. And that's a very rigid, intense experience trying to follow the rules, your whole life. And it's like depends, it's like whose rules, what rules. It's like those are all made up too. We're talking about the narrow path versus the wide path, and Jesus talked about the narrow path traveled by few, and it's like that's such a big talking point for Christianity is just the billions of people. It's like it's a very wide path there, following someone else, something else, as opposed to just following yourself.
But not according to them. They're taking the narrow path, just one after another. It's a straight Christian line, taking the narrow path.
Jesus.
As wide as Jesus. Because to them, they're not taking the wide path. They are all taking the same narrow path that Jesus did, just in a single file, orderly row. And what do all rules have in common? Predictability, guaranteed predictability. If we follow these rules, then we know what the person will do. We know what the group will do, what the society will do. If everyone is just following the commandments, well, we'll know what every person is going to do. But that's not true. And it's so funny when you hear someone saying, it's like I don't even know you anymore. I love that statement because it's dismissing the fact that everyone is unpredictable. Everyone and life is unpredictable. And that's just another way to say that life, people, experiences are uncertain. And it's just another way that we try to resist that or label it as something else. It's not uncertain, it's unpredictable. But if we put in these rules and these barriers and we dig these trenches and put up these walls and we put up the barbed wire, there will be no uncertainty. We will have life will all of a sudden become predictable and unpredictable.
Yeah. As long as we have these structures in place, trying to have, oh my gosh.
How's that going for us?
It depends on who you're talking to. And I mean this as a
Yeah.
parent. Like, and I'm saying this as a parent because I think it's really important that we remember not to vilify these things. Not to vilify rules, because once upon a time, rules kept you alive when you didn't have the awareness to realize the other considerations. But you see, that's the kicker, isn't it? It's not about getting rid of rules.
No.
It's about growing up. So that way they're not necessary. We've talked about this previously, about a society, or rather the difference between a society that follows the rules for fear of punishment versus a society that just abides by the rules because they make sense.
Well, then it sounds like it's more that people are taking that rules somehow transform into considerations.
Or
It's not
considerations
required.
into rules. And that's, I think, the problem is that they start as considerations
And
and
they
then
become required.
because people
Well, then
don't
they
pay attention to them, and there's a consequence, right? This is what you do with your children. Like, you try to tell them, like, Billy, don't smack your sister. Billy, you wouldn't like it if somebody smacked you. And you try and finally you're like, Billy, if you smack your sister one more time, there's no dessert. And it's just because Billy isn't looking at anything past himself. Billy's looking at his own needs. Billy's looking at his own feelings. Billy's looking at himself first. He's not even aware of his sister. And you can't teach him to be. That is where we make our mistake, is that we keep thinking that we can get out there and somehow enforce peacefulness, that we can somehow go in there and teach people responsibility, not recognizing that makes them irresponsible. And this is why I'm very much not in favor of anarchy, but I would say as close to it as possible. And by that, I mean small community-driven governments that work together, but small community-driven governments where the rules aren't rules. They're the considerations of the town. They're the considerations of the community, agreed upon, discussed, not enforced, but discussed according to the priorities. And then when the priorities of the community aren't in line, it's up to everybody to work together. It's up to everybody to grow together. And you can't do that by vilifying people who aren't following the rules. You can't. There's no growth in that.
But yeah, we'll hold on to that perspective that like, oh no, I'm right and you're wrong. And just that idea that there is a way to be sure of that, to guarantee that there is a right versus a wrong. It's like so much of that just comes down to your own perspective, your own fears. Usually they're self fears, like things you're afraid of in yourself, the right and the wrong, because those, they don't actually exist. They're not actually a thing that exists in reality. Like, it is what it is. I remember one of my first big mushroom trips. It hit me how everything just is. Like, everything just is. Everything just is. That was a thing that kept hitting me over and over. And we layer a lot on top of that, a lot of expectations, a lot of ideas of shoulds and shouldn'ts, on top of the reality that everything's just baseline. Everything just is. It's not anything beyond that until you make it something beyond that. And then you got a bunch of people behind you to validate that. But that's all. It's individuals creating these groups to feel better about not feeling so alone in their perspective of something. Because that's, right now we're just talking to individual people. We're not talking to a group of people who are tuning into the live streams, by the way. Appreciate you tuning in. But it's individuals. And so to fear groups, you can create them to feel almost like feel better about your own fears, but like it's just an individual you're looking at, interacting with, thinking about. And you can create a whole, world on the other side of that individual. But it's not outside of your head.
Funny. We had talked about this previously, like, just being yourself, like just that, just being yourself. But
That little thing.
The same is true with, everything just is. That thing that you're talking about, just being, is everything in the universe.
Yeah.
Moving together in equilibrium to the point of not just collapsing together into a black hole. That thing that just is the most complicated thing that we could ever possibly fathom, to the point where we actually can't fathom what just is. All of our science, all of our religion is trying to figure out what just is. And in doing so, we've actually gotten farther away from what is. Because what is here and now. But it's huge, it's complex, it's unified. There's nothing just about what is.
Oh, it is. It's insane. Like, it's crazy reality, and how much it is, this baseline sort of experience with the most variety and like just the most unique points of view and perspective, like the potential for so many unique perspectives and points of view, and trying to subdue that with things like, groupthink, as opposed to just you think, you think this, you think that. That's all you get. And it's like, that's what you're looking at. That's what you're thinking about. is just your own. If you're thinking about yourself, it's just you. Like there's a aloneness there that I don't think people want to look at so much. It's where freedom is, but it's very much you are absolutely entirely alone with everyone else. And so you get too focused on the being alone side, and you know, you forget that the other side is just as true as well.
We're all in that together.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right, but being alone doesn't need to be the feeling of loneliness, and I like that we brought up that groups don't really exist, that the group only exists in concept, because a group is still very much individuals acting on their own, doing their own, making their own choices, and then saying that it's the group that's doing that. No, no, no. I'm not an individual. I'm part of the Red Cross. I am part of the Red Cross movement. And it's like, no, I'm an individual that is making individual choices, making my own ripples, and then crediting that to a group. And in the same way that we do that for groups in like organizations, we do that as countries. You're still going through the individual experience of living on a planet with everyone else. And whether or not you feel that you're a part of a group that has meetings, or you're a part of a group that has citizenship, or you're a part of a group that has heritage, doesn't matter. You're still going through the experience of an individual, whether or not you give credit to the individual or the group, or to both, or to neither. And so there are no groups. And so I like that we bring that up, and I like that we emphasize that with the DU community. Like, we say community, but it is very much a community of one. It is people showing up for themselves, not because it means anything about them, and not that because they're going to control the perception of them to others, not because they're going to save anyone or save themselves or be selfless or be selfish. People are showing up for any reason and no reason. And that is their choice, that is their experience. And as much as it feels very shared, the experience, it's still all going through the same individual filter for each of us. And so it is a community of one, in the same way that it is a group of one. It's just that we give the credit, or we give the perception that it's a group of people, it's a group think, but it's really just the same thought collecting in the same space and then calling itself something different. Oh, I'm not thinking, this is group think. Oh, that's mob mentality. A mob is still made of individuals that are all making individual choices. So it doesn't really feel like groups exist, except in concept. And that's where a lot of our fear is, also in concept, because what is so scary about here right now? What are you so helpless of? It feels so bizarre to tell myself that I am so scared of this moment, and I have no idea what I'm scared of. I'm just scared of a question mark. That just sounds absurd. And yet it feels so real. But I don't have to take that feeling like it's the foundation of the experience that I'm having. And so I don't have to give credit to the fear in the same way I don't have to give credit to a group. I don't have to give credit or take away credit. There's just so much happening, and it's not too much, because it'd only be too much for an individual, or for a little piece of everything that's happening. And so as much as it feels like I am an individual, or I'm having an individual experience, it very much feels more and more in each moment that there's just so much space encapsulating all of this individual experience. And so it doesn't seem so hard to let go of just looking outside of the individual. It doesn't seem like I'm being selfless. It just feels like there's less self.
Yeah. And I think that's it. Like I've been saying since season 1, it's always both and neither. And if you can keep that in mind, it really helps. Am I the individual, or am I the whole? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And no to both of those. Is the universe internal or external? Yes. And no to both of those.
Both?
Because they're just perspectives, right? That's the point. It's both and neither. That's why it's really important to keep these things in balance. Otherwise, you end up getting super out of whack. You end up standing on one side thinking it's the most serious side, and you never look at the other side, and you can know that. as you're doing it, you can feel it. It becomes dire. All of a sudden, everything becomes super serious. You got to do things. There's like a bar you got to live up to. It's back to being about you instead of you just being you. Not the thought, but the reality, which you can't help but be. That's very much it. We're going to wrap up this episode in a little while here because this conversation is amazing and I love having it. But we do have another episode that we're going to be recording in about an hour and a bit, Dualistic Unity Raw, which is going to be episode 202. Very excited about that. I did want to take a moment to actually make a few announcements. The first of which is that our retreat process has changed. And what I mean by that is we are not doing any more mini retreats in 2024. As we've said before, we have one full 9-day retreat coming up November 2nd to November 10th in Port Alberni. You can find that on the website right now at dualisticunity.com. Just look under events. You will find the Port Alberni retreat information. In 2025, we're going to be doing a number of mini retreats. We don't know where yet, but we will be posting that to the website probably within the next 2 months. Keep an eye out there. We're actually going to post a couple of optional locations on Patreon to get some feedback from the community, as it were. But we're no longer just selling tickets to the retreat. And I wanted to make this announcement because at the moment, we've actually had quite a few applications because now we are doing an application process for these retreats for a number of reasons. We've had a lot of people want to come to the retreats who couldn't come to the retreats. We've had a number of people who didn't come to the retreats because they didn't want to give or rather they wanted to give somebody else the opportunity to come to the retreat. So in this way, it gives us an opportunity to look at everyone, why they want to come, how long they've been part of the community, whether they've been to a retreat or not. And we can actually look at the entire collection of people who are coming rather than just, kind of hoping for the best. And I say this not just for everybody coming to the retreat, but for the person who buys the retreat ticket and then later on says, well, I guess I'm not really sure. Can I have a refund on that? And we're like, well, sorry, we have no refunds. And, so we've decided to make this process a little bit more of a process. You really have to let us know that you want to come. This can't be one of those things where you're like last minute, well, I've changed my mind, or, I'm not sure if I'm ready yet. If you're ready, then fill in the application. So I just wanted to throw that out there. That is the first thing. The second thing, and I think this is really exciting, and I mentioned this earlier, we have over 550 episodes of Dualistic Unity, which is amazing in under 3 years. But the majority of those episodes have been recorded in like the last year. Like we've really ramped up the amount of content that we're pumping out. And the listener might not be aware of this, but the podcast platform that we use, actually all podcast platforms, have a limit on how many episodes you can actually host. And we're going to come to that limit very quickly if we don't adjust accordingly. And so what we're going to do is we are going to start grandfathering a few of the older episodes. Now, you might be thinking, oh no, what about the old seasons? The old seasons are fine, but we're going to go into the raw episodes and we're going to take the first 100 episodes and we're going to pull them off the podcast one by one, and we're going to put them on Patreon. So that way they're always available to anybody who would like to help support us on Patreon. You can listen to the episodes there. They'll always be in the archives, as well as all the group sessions and whatnot that we've also done on Patreon.
Very juicy.
Very juicy. So it's going to be a great way to build that archive, because again, you've got all of my old articles from like 2005 to 2007. You got a story that I was working on. We got some draft books, right? We got the ebooks are on there. We've got the draft of the new book that's coming together, that's going to be released soon. So there's just a lot of stuff coming on Patreon, but I wanted to let everybody know, like, if you haven't listened to those first 100 episodes of Raw, I'd suggest doing it now, because shortly they're no longer going to be available.
We're pulling a whole Disney act. No, I was kidding. Disney, Disney has the vaults. They take away some of the classics. I have to. Well, I don't know if it's a real vault. It's a metaphorical vault. Yeah. I don't know if it's a real vault. It's definitely metaphorical, where they like release like the original Cinderella or the Fox and the Hound or certain things. But no, I just wanted to say that for the comedic punchline. That was strictly for me. But if you laughed, I'm glad.
Poor Mickey's still locked down there.
But yeah, updates coming, changes coming. It's very exciting. And the Port Alberni retreat application, get that figured out for sure.
Absolutely.
Uh,
So this has been an excellent episode. I think we are going to wrap this up here. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who could be involved with the live stream. We will be back in the next hour and 10 minutes if you can join us for Dualistic Unity Raw. And if you haven't actually joined us for a group yet, or a free Wednesday group, or even playing a little putt party on Discord on Wednesdays, definitely check out our group schedule, dualistiCunity.com. You can find the group schedule under community. You can even download it onto your calendar app, so it tells you where we are, what we're doing, and where you can find us. See, it helps, especially as a co-host. You're like, now I know where I'm going.
Oh no, I did that from the jump. I'm an OG viewer, Patreon supporter, so I did it because I was like, I don't want to work hard to remember. This is what technology is for. Work smarter, people, when you can, not harder.
Absolutely.
Sweet.
That is it for today.
Wrapping it up here.
Thank
All
you
right.
so much,
Thanks
everyone,
for tuning in. Talk to you soon.